Hello friends, in this session we are going to see another use of this keyword. In the previous sessions we have seen some uses of this keyword and where exactly this keyword is required and what is this keyword, how it works as a reference variable, and how you can use this keyword to refer the instance variables, and from which context you can use this keyword. All these things we have seen in last sessions, right? So in this session we are going to see another use of this keyword with constructor. Say you have a class now, say class some ABC class, and in that I have two variables or some say int x, one variable int y, one string type variable say s1, one say some boolean b, something like this, right? Some variables, and I have a constructor in this, say ABC. First one is default constructor, so I'll say it is SOP statement of ABC default constructor, right? So I have one more constructor, the constructor overloading, and here I'll just take int x and int y as a parameter, and I'll say here this is SOP statement of ABC int and int argumented constructor, right? And then it is this dot x is equal to x and this dot y is y, right? So same with some other constructor, I'll take say ABC and int x into y and string say it is s1, and you have boolean b, right? And in these some SOP statement, it is ABC int string and boolean argumented constructor, right? And inside this I have to initialize that remaining statement. So this is this dot x is x and this dot y is y and this dot s1 is s1 and this dot b is b, right? So this is the program, right? And now I have class ABC, in that 4 instance variables and 3 overloaded constructor, right? The constructor 1, 2 and 3, right? So this is 3, this is 1 and 2, 3 overloaded constructors. Now I can create an object of class ABC by using any one of these 3. Now you know the use of the constructor. The constructor use is to create a object, right? Any constructor, either this one or this one or this one, right? Anyone. The use of the constructor is just to create an object. Then what is the use of parameterized constructor? Parameterized constructor use is to initialize the instance variables of an object at the time of creating the object, right? So this is the use of parameterized constructor. Parameterized constructor use is to initialize the state of the object at the time of creating the object. But if I use this first one here, it is default constructor. If I use default constructor to create the object, then the state of that object gets the default values, right? X will be default, y default, s1 default and b default. But if I use the second one, this constructor, then x and y state gets initialized, but s1 and b1 remains uninitialized. If I use this 4 parameterized constructor, then all the 4 fields of the object gets initialized when you create the object. So I'll create here some object, say here ABC A1 by using default constructor new ABC using default constructor. Then how this memory gets allocated? So this is A1 and creates an object, and inside this object you have 4 parameters, 4 instance variables. X gets default, Y gets default, S1 gets default, that is null, and B also gets default, that is false, right? So the address of this is 1040 and it is stored into 1040, right? If I use the next this constructor, then say ABC A2 is new ABC, and you have to give 2 parameters to call this constructor, right? So I'm giving a set 10 and 20. Now how this memory gets allocated? This is A2 and creating an object. Inside this object you have X, and X value is already supplied, so it is 10. Y value is 20, and memory for S1 also gets allocated, but that remains null because no value is supplied, and this is B is by default false, right? So this address is 2040, this address stores here 2040, something like this, right? And this points into this. Now if I use this third constructor to, so in this first one, when you have created the first object by using default constructor, the state of the object gets default values because you are not doing anything, you are not supplying any values for that instance variables. Now if I use second constructor, here 2 values I am supplying, that is 10 and 20, and that is for X and Y. So X and Y gets initialized, but S1 and B remains default. If I use the third one constructor, say ABC A3 is new ABC of say 9988 high and say true. Now how the objects get created? This is A3 and creates an object, this. Now X value you are supplying, that value is 99, Y value you are supplying, the value is 88, and S1 gets the value that is high and B gets the value that is true. So address is 4040, this is here 40 and 40, right? So now if I use the 4 argumented constructor, then all the fields of the objects gets initialized, gets the value. You have to supply the values here. If I use 2 argumented, 2 gets value and 2 remains default. If I am using default constructor, then state of the object gets default values. Now here if I want to initialize those later, then you have to say like this: s1.x is equal to say 1 and a1.y is equal to say 2, something like this. So then this becomes 1 and this becomes 2, right? Same way remaining S1 and B also should be initialized. So the use of the constructor is to create the object, but the use of the parameterized constructor is to initialize the state of the object at the time of creating the object, right? So now when you say here this is new ABC is called and objects created, all states got the default values. When you say new ABCDs, it calls this constructor and this gets initialized and this object is created. When you say this, it is this constructor is called, right? 3 different constructors is called to create 3 different objects. Now this is constructor overloading. Declaring multiple constructors in one class with different sets of parameters is called as constructor overloading. Now I want to apply constructor chaining on this. Constructor chaining. Constructor chaining means currently what is happening, which constructor I am calling, ABC I am calling, using ABC constructor only it is creating the object, and this call is not using this constructor or this constructor, only default constructor is used to create the object. Now when I'll call this second constructor, it is using only this constructor, the first one and the third one is not using, only this constructor is used to create the object. And if I use the third one here, only third constructor is used to create the object and remaining 2 constructor is not used. So all the individual constructors are creating different objects. How many times you call, every time creates a new object. But what I want is, when I'll call this constructor, set this one, it has to call this constructor, and from here it has to go to this constructor, from here it has to go to this constructor. Means to create one object I need to invoke all the 3 constructors, and then finally I should get the object, right? So you already know what is the how it creates the object exactly is, say I'll take one more example, a small example. Say you have a class hello, right? And in that hello class you have a default constructor. Say this is hello and default constructor, right? Now when you create an object for this hello, it calls like this. Say hello age is equal to new hello, right? Then this is calling the constructor to create the object, and it creates, this is age and it points to this object, right? No instance variable, say 2010 or 402040, right? Now in any constructor, by default the first statement is super. If you want to write that, you can write, or if you don't want to write, that also is okay. Now what happens exactly is, when you call a constructor like this new hello, then control comes into this hello, and from here it has to call the super. Super means the super class constructor, super class default constructor, okay? It creates super class default constructors. It calls, and super class default constructor creates the object, and the object address is returned into age. Like this it calls. Now in previous example, in this whatever constructor we have defined in this, in all these constructors you already have, by default you will have a, in this constructor you will have a, I will have a super here by default, or if you want to write explicitly, that also you can do. In this also first statement is super, and in this also first statement is super by default, super, right? So now when you call new ABC, control comes into the ABC, and from here first statement is super, means it has to go to the super class default constructor. Now what is the super class in ABC? In ABC super class is by default extends object class, right? So when you call new ABC, constructor calls come into this constructor. From here it goes to super, means object class default constructor will be invoked, and then you get your object, right? Then you get your object. Same way when you call this constructor, here also the control comes in this, and the first statement is super. From here it goes to the object class default constructor, and the object is created. Same way when you call this one, it comes into this three parameterized constructor. From here first statement is super, and it goes to the super class default constructor, then the object is created. Now what I want is when I'll call this constructor ABC, 4 argumented constructor, I'll call, the call has to come into this place, right? From here it should not go to the super class default constructor directly. From here call should go into this constructor. From here also it should not go to the object class default constructor. From here it should come into this place, right? And from here it has to call the super class default constructor, and has to go to the object class default constructor, and the object should be created. But if I do it like this, suppose I have the class, say class ABC, and in ABC I have int x, and I have a default constructor ABC, one default constructor, first statement by default super, and I have one more constructor, this is int x, to initialize the state, and I'll write here it is this dot x is equal to x, right? Now what I want is, when I'll say ABC, A1 is new ABC, and it is parameterized 10, parameterized, you are calling this constructor. From here by default first statement is super, by default first statement is super. Because of default super statement super, or if you want explicitly you can write super, because of super here it goes to the object class default constructor. What I want is, it has to go to this constructor first, current class default constructor, right? So to call the constructor, what are the approach you have seen is, you have to use new keyword. To call a constructor you have to use new keyword, and through the new keyword only you can call a constructor. So what I want is, from this place it has to go to this. It should not directly go to the object class default constructor. So to do that, what I have to do is, I have to say here new ABC, default constructor is called. But if I say like this, here you are telling once new ABC, one object should be created and the object address should be stored into A1. A1 should point into this. Again when you will say here new ABC, this first statement remains super as it is, and from here it actually directly goes to the object class default constructor because of this statement. And from there when the control comes back, because then control comes into this statement, and from here it comes into this place, and from here again you have a super, and again it goes to the super class default constructor, right? So two object is created. Whenever you are using new keyword, one object is created from this place and another object is created from this place. So two object is created. But I don't want like this. I want on the same object, both the constructor should be called. Here it should not create a new object. Okay, it should not create a new. On the same object only, the two constructors should be called. Right. So if you want to do that, if you want one constructor from another constructor by using on the same object, then you have to use this keyword, and this is like this. Now you have to write say class ABC. In ABC you have ABC1 default constructor, and by default this statement is super, means it has to go to the object class default constructor. And I have one parameter. I say here I'll take one int x, and one parameterized also I have ABC, say int x, right? From here what I want is it has to go to this. So here first time by default it has super, Now if I write here okay, I want one I want on the same object, I want when I'll say this constructor, from here it has to go to the default constructor first, and from default constructor is to go to the object class default constructor, right? Not from here directly. So what I have to do is, if I write here this with empty parenthesis, this with empty parenthesis means it is the constructor call. Okay, it is the constructor call. Now when you say constructor call, suppose it is this to call this current class default constructor. This keyword here I am using to call the current class default constructor. How it is default? Because inside this it is not having any argument, so it has to come into this no argumented constructor, right? But by default here it has a super keyword. So now if I call say new ABC with some 10, if I call like this, then this control is coming at this point, and by default first statement is super. From here it is going to the object class default constructor. Super class is object class, right? Super class is object class, so it is going to the object class default constructor. And when control comes back from there, and then it goes to this constructor, and from here this control goes to object control goes to this one, and from here again it is super, from here again it goes to the object class default constructor. Means for one object creation, you are going to object class default constructor 2 times, right? I don't want this. I want, if you reach to object class default constructor 2 times, then it is not going to work fine. It is an error. So what exactly you have to do is, if I don't write this super, then how it works? When you say if I don't write this super, then how it works is, say this super is not there, no super. Now when you say new ABC, control comes into this, and first statement, control is in ABC, first statement is this, and because of first statement this, control goes to this class default constructor, and from here first statement is super, and it goes to the object class default constructor. Now when control comes back, it comes into super, and here whatever statement it is going to execute, and then it is coming back into this. So like this if you do, then for one object creation 2 constructor is called, and but it is object class default constructor you have used only once, right? So the another use of this keyword is to call a from another constructor on the same object, right? This is the another use of this keyword. Here you have to give the parenthesis, right? So now if I take it like this, suppose you take the class is this one. So you have class ABC. In that ABC you have int x and y, two parameters. Take a default constructor ABC and you write here it is ABC default, ABC default constructor. This is ABC default constructor, right? Then you take one more constructor ABC with one argumented int x, and this is having this dot x is x, right? And you write here one SOP statement, say this is ABC int argumented constructor, right? Then I'll have one more constructor, say ABC, and this is int x and int y, right? In this what I want is I'll initialize this dot y is y, and on SOP statement I'll write the SOP statement is ABC int and int argumented constructor, right? And when I'll create the object by using this constructor, so I'm creating an object ABC A1 is new ABC. Sorry, it has to give two arguments. I'm giving 10 and 20, right? When I call this constructor, what I want is constructor is coming into this, control is coming at this place, and the x value is 10 and y value is 20, right? From here I want, by default it has super here, from here it directly goes to the object class default constructor and creates the object. But I don't want this. What I want is, I want from here the control should go to, from here control should go to this, right? So to do that you have to write here this with this, and this from 3 argumented constructor I am going to call 2 argumented constructor. From 2 argumented constructor I'm going to call 1 argumented constructor. And because it is having an argument, constructor we are calling with this, but it is having an argument, so I have to supply the argument. I will supply x, okay? I'll supply x. Now control is here, and in that again from here I don't want, by default it has super here, by default it has super, and here also by default it has super, and I don't want from here also should go to the object class default constructor. What I want is from here the control should go into this constructor, right? So again you have to write here this, but in this you don't have any argument, so this is empty, right? Empty. Control comes into this, and in that also by default you have super, but this super should work. Now from here the control goes to the object class default constructor and your object is ready. Object is ready. So this is A1 memory, okay? This is A1. Now when the object is creating here, JVM will search what are the instance variables available. Instance variables are, you have x, which got the default value, you have y, that also gets the default value, right? Now from there when a control comes back, it comes back to from where it has gone, it is here, right? So in these the output should be, say from here control came and super was done. Now control is at this point, so control should print here, say ABC default constructor, right? Now this execution is over, so from here control should come back from where it is gone actually, so it is this. Now in this again control is flowing top to bottom approach, so this prints here ABC and int, right? ABC and int, ABC int argumented constructor. Now it is this dot x, this dot x. What is this dot x actually? Or what I'll do is I'll draw the memory diagram for this. Say I have the memory diagram in this way. So this is also not there. Right. Now the memory diagram is this. And say you have class test. Somewhere you have class test. This is class test. In test you have public static void and main method. In main method you are telling ABC A1 is equal to new ABC of 10 and 20, right? And when you will execute test, then first test class should be loaded. This is test is loaded, right? And it has to verify the main method. Okay, main method is there, so this is main. And inside the main, first one local variable of type ABC, sorry, A1, ABC type A1, okay. Now it has to call this constructor new ABC. When you say here A1 dot new ABC of 10 and 20, right, 10 and 20. Then this is one stack frame because it is a constructor call. So on top of that, this constructor, this is actually the two parameterized constructor called. This is two parameterized constructor, right? This is called. Now on top of this two parameterized constructor is loaded ABC and this. Two instance variables are there, x and y, sorry, local variable. So x value you have supplied here 10 and y value you have supplied 20, right? Now control is here. Inside this you have the first statement. The first statement you have written here is this of x. This of x means you are calling the constructor which is having one parameter which is of type int. So it is this one. Right, you are calling this. By using this, you are calling the constructor from here, okay, from here. So it has to go to this constructor. It has to go here. Now in this first statement, in that you have first statement, that is this by using x. This means it is a one parameterized constructor call. So what will happen? On top of this, one parameterized constructor is loaded. So this is one parameterized constructor loaded. In that ABC, and it has a local variable again x, and the value of this x which you are supplying from here, this is this x. And what is this x here? This is local x. Local x value is 10, and 10 comes into this. It is stored here, right? In that again you have the first statement is this. Then from here the control should go to the constructor which is default. So in this first statement is this, and from here it goes to this place. So this is again ABC default constructor is loaded. Inside the default constructor, if you want to write, you can write, or if you don't write also, by default you have a super, right? By default you have a super. Then from here the control should go to object class default constructor, right? So here you have super. Then it goes to the object class default constructor, and top of this, actually on top of this, object class default constructor is loaded. Object class default constructor is loaded. When object class default constructor is loaded and it starts execution, then you got the object here. This is the object created in heap. Okay, this is heap stack, and this is method area, right? So this is loaded. At the time of creating this object, JVM will search what are the instance variables available, and the instance variable here you have x, and that got the default value 0, instance variable y, that got default value 0. That is done. Then control comes back. When control comes back here, you have a this, because the memory is already allocated here, and this gets 10, 20, and it points into this, right? This comes here, and you got this. So when control comes here, it comes into super along with this, and you got the address of the object, and it is stored into this keyword, right? Now control is came back. Then control flows here from the top to bottom approach and prints the output here. So this is ABC default constructor, right? ABC default constructor. Done. Now this is statement here, no other statement is there to execute, so control comes back from where it has gone, it comes here. Now here you have again a this, and this reference variable points to 1020, and this is coming here, right? So control is back. From here control is back at this place. Now it is first statement. First statement is ABC int constructor, right? Then control goes to the next statement, and this dot x. Now this dot x means it is this x, and you are writing here actually this dot x is x, right? Local x has to store into this dot x, and this dot x is this, so the value here is signed 10, right? So here no other statement is there to execute, so control comes back from where it has gone, right? This is done. Now control at this place, control is available here, and again it gets here this. Now at this point this is 1020 again, and this also starts pointing into this. Now control is at the first statement here. This is the first statement, and in that again it prints ABC int and int, right? Constructor. Now in this control flows from the top to bottom again. So this printing is over, and this dot y is y, means the local y here it is this dot y is y. This y is local y. Local y has to store into this dot y, and this dot y is actually this. So this value gets here 20. Now this all execution is over, and control goes back to from where it has called. From here control comes into this, and it stores a1 is equal to this is at this point. So the value of that a1 stores into this, and it is 1020 these points here, right? So this is the execution flow of this program when you use this keyword from one constructor to another constructor to call a constructor, right? From one constructor to another constructor we can use this keyword. Now the important point here you have to notice is the execution flow of this program, how it executes. And remember one more point: when you are not defining this keyword in any constructor, then first statement of the constructor is super, and that is going to call the object class default constructor or the super class default constructor by default, and it is not going to call your class constructor. If you want to call one your class constructor from another constructor, then you have to use this keyword. And this concept, calling one constructor from another constructor on the same object, is called as constructor chaining. Okay, so this is constructor chaining. You are calling one constructor from another constructor on the same object, and this process is called as constructor chaining. So constructor chaining you have to do by using this keyword, by using this keyword. Another important point you have to notice here is when I am calling a constructor from another constructor, I have to use parentheses. So if I write here this and parentheses, this is a constructor call. Or if I write this dot x, then this is here using the variable. This is a variable of the current instance. This is using the variable of the current instance, and this, if I write in this way, then this calls a constructor from another constructor. This is a very important point to remember here. Next one is, say when you say, I'll take like this. Say I have class A and class B. Sorry, class B extends A. B is the subclass of A class, right? Then class A by default having a default constructor like this by default, and B is also having by default a default constructor like this, and here by default super is there. By default super is there, and in this also by default super is there, right? Now if I create an object of B, say B1 is equal to new B, when I will say like this, you are calling this default constructor, and the default constructor first statement by default is super, then immediate superclass default constructor should be called. What is the immediate superclass? Immediate superclass is A. So from here it has to go to this, right? It has to come at this place, and in this also first statement is by default super. Now what is the immediate superclass for A class? Immediate superclass of A class is object class. So this is going to call the object class default constructor, and this is going to create the object, right? Now by default it is super, so this by default super is going to call the immediate superclass default constructor, right? Immediate superclass default constructor. Now assume if I have something like this say class ABC, and in that I have a default constructor, right? One default constructor is there in this, and I have for some statement, say SOP statement, something height is printing, and then okay, fine, then I have one more constructor of the same class, or say I have, it continues, okay, it continues. I have one more constructor ABC int x argumented, and in that one SOP statement is say hi, right? Now from here I am saying this at this point, this means what? It has to call the default constructor. But what is the first statement by default? By default first statement is super. By default first statement is super. Now if I create an object of this, say ABC, A1 is new ABC of 10, then you are calling this constructor. By default first statement is super, so from here it goes to, what is the superclass for ABC? Superclass is object class default constructor, so it goes to object class default constructor. From there when control comes back, it comes into this and comes into this, right? And from here again you are going to here, and here also first statement is super, right? From here again it goes to object class default constructor. So for one constructor creation, one object creation at this point, it is going to object class default constructor 2 times. Because of this reason, this keyword to call a constructor from another constructor must be always the first statement. To call one constructor from another constructor by using this keyword must be the first statement. It cannot be middle or somewhere or some other place. Now the super keyword also should be the first statement, and this keyword also should be the first statement, right? And both cannot be first at a time. So by default first statement is super, but when you write this keyword instead of super, this keyword when you write, then super will not be there, right? If I write super at this place, and again if I write this also immediately after that, then it will give an error saying that this should be the first statement. Or if I write this as first statement and then super, you cannot write, again it will give super must be the first statement. Means in one constructor you cannot use both super and this at a time. You can use any one, either super or this, and both should be the first statement, whatever you are using. If you are not using any one of these super and this, then by default first statement is super, so that it can reach to the super class default constructor to create an object, right? Next, this is important point, you have to remember that this always must be the first statement. Next is, suppose, okay, let's see some example with this programmatically before going to next. Say suppose you have Eclipse. So here, say I have a class ABC and int x, y, string type s1 and boolean type b. I have a constructor ABC default constructor, and so this is ABC default constructor, right? And then I have ABC int x and int y and ABC int and int argumented constructor, right? Next I have, say, ABC int x int y, string type s1 and boolean type b, suppose, and in that I have ABC int and string and boolean type right? And here I'll write, say it is this dot x is x and this dot y is y, x, right? Same here, I'll initialize this dot x is x, this dot y is y, this dot s1 is s1 and this dot b is b, right? And this, and if I create an object, and I'll write a method here to see the input, so all the output of each object creation. So I'll write here, it is void show info is the function, and it should print, say, x plus one tab space plus y plus one tab space plus s1 plus tab space plus b, right? All the information should be printed on all the object. So this is ABC A1 new ABC, right? And A1 dot show info, sorry, it is just ABC and A1 dot show info. First object created, and that object state is going to be printed by this, right? You run it, one object is created and the information is default values, right? Now if I create ABC A2 and new ABC, say 10 and 20, two argumented constructor we're calling, right? So it has to print here ABC, sorry, A2 dot show info and run it. It is this, two argumented constructor is called, and the value, first two is initialized, next two gets the default value. Now you have ABC A3 new ABC, and it is, say, 9988 high, and this is, say, true, right? And A3 dot show info, right? It is printing that. So this this is done, three argumented. Okay, you write it correctly. It is const, right? Run it. Four argument constructor call, and all the states are initialized. So in this we have not used this keyword. Three constructor is created and three different sets of values are given to create three different objects, and all are getting the different values, right? Now what I want is all these constructor first statement by default is super, right? First statement is super. If you want to write it is okay, or if you don't write, that is also fine. If I write here super, okay, or if I write here super, that is also fine. So this is super, right? Run it. This is done, same. But super always must be the first statement by default. If I take super from here and if I put it at this place, it is a compilation fail, saying that super must be the first statement. Same way here also, if I put it from here and if I put it at this place, it is also not okay, right? In this also, if I take this super from here and middle somewhere if I place, then this is not okay. Super must be the first statement. So super is commented in all the places. So super by default first statement is super. Now what I want is, I want that say I'll create these two objects are not created, I'm creating only this one, right? Currently it is working fine, check it, it is working fine, no problem. Now what I want is, when I'll call this 4 argumented constructor, it is this one, then x and y I will not initialize here. From this constructor I want to call this one, and it is not this, not here, right? So what I will do is, if I say new ABC of say 10 and 20, right? 10 and 20. Now what will happen? It creates a new object. It is not on the same object. It is on the different object. So when I am calling from here that this is ABC1 object should be created, and that object a x and y value should be this, and it is going to initialize from this constructor now. But when I'll do like this, because this is going to create a different object, so in your object, in this object, this value is not going to be stored. So in your object, these two place for x and y remains default value, that is zeros and ones, and you can see it here, because in middle here it is creating a different object. So I don't want like this. What I want is, it should be on the same object, okay? It is calling, okay, you see once again here, when you will say like this new ABC, this constructor is called, and see the output, this constructor is called. From your constructor, this constructor is called. So it should not be like this. It should, if a constructor is calling fine, but these values should be initialized, means the constructor, both the constructors should be called on the same object. It should not create a new different object. So it is not okay. What you have to do is, you have to say here it is this with x and y, or whatever, x and y, or 10 or 20, or here we have given 10 and 20, it is actually x and y. X and y, right? This of x and y. Okay, this is giving an error because this should be the first statement. Okay, this should be the first statement. So now this is done. From this constructor, when you call the 4 argumented constructor with x and y 4 values, that x and y value supplied to this constructor, and the object is created, x as y value is stored, and then when control comes back, s1 and b is stored from this constructor, right? Now you run, it is okay. Both the constructor is called and this value gets initialized. But now I want that it should call this constructor also from here. So then you can say here it is this with empty, nothing is there. Now how it will call? When you will call this constructor, first statement is here this, then it comes at this place, from here first statement this, and it comes here, and here first statement is not this, it is super, it is super, right? Now you check, run it, all the 3 constructors called, and it is this way, it is initialized, all the 3 constructors is called, okay, fine. But when I'm giving here this, at the same time if I give here super also, so it is super, then this is, it is saying that this must be the first statement. And if I write here this, then this is saying that the super must be the first statement. So from this we can say that any constructor first statement by default is super, or it can be this if you write explicitly. But any one of these, either it should be this or it should be super. Any constructor first statement must be either this or super. It cannot be any other thing. By default is super, right? So now here we are doing constructor chaining by using this keyword. By using this keyword we are calling constructor chaining. On one object it is creating, on one object it is calling all the 3 constructors, right? And I cannot do it like this. If you do like this, it gets a new object, and on the new object this operation performs, it is not on the same object. Okay, it is not on the same object. So this is fine. This is constructor chaining. And the important point you have to notice here is when I am using this to call a constructor, it must be first statement one point. Another point is it should have a parenthesis to call a constructor. But to refer a instance variable, you should always use dot. Okay, dot symbol, right? Dot operator you have to use to refer the instance variables from one constructor. Or if you want to call a constructor from another constructor by using this keyword, it should have a parenthesis. Parenthesis is empty when you call a default constructor, but from here I am calling two argumented constructor, so the argument is supplied here. Okay, so this is another use of this keyword for constructor chaining. But assume if I write it like this, say I have one more class A, and class B, class A and class B. Now sorry, okay, say just A only, and in A I am having a default constructor is this, and I have one parameterized constructor also, say int S, something like this. Now both in these is having the super keyword at first statement. So if I write here this, now it becomes constructor chaining. Or say here I am not writing this, here I am writing this and say 10. Now what will happen when you create an object by using default constructor? From here it first comes into parameterized constructor, and here you have super, and from here it goes to the object class. So from here it goes to the object class default constructor, right? But what if I write like this? Say this is not super and this is also this. Now what happens when you call this constructor? From here it come at this place, means it is this constructor, and from this argument to one argumented constructor, again it goes to the default constructor, means it becomes here and it becomes recursive, and recursive constructor invocation is not allowed, so you cannot do this. It is not okay, right? Same way when you say like this, say you have fine. So this is the use of this keyword. And now come back to this place, and so in this, when you call the constructor like this, then what happens exactly is say I am creating an object here now, A1 is new A, default constructor I am calling. So these, suppose it is default constructor, so from here it has to come back at this place, and here you are saying this with 10 means one argumented constructor, so from here it should come at this place, and it is in this constructor. Now from here again you are saying this default, again it goes back to this place, again it comes here, again it goes back, so it becomes recursive. So recursive constructor invocation is not allowed in Java. This is one important point you have to remember. And next is, so this is not okay, it is a comment. When you want to comment, it is fine, right? Now here this execution flow is when you say say this is when you will tell here ABC A1 is new ABC of 10, 20, high, and say true, right? When you will call like this 4 argumented constructor, then what happens is from here when you will call this constructor, it comes into this, and in that first statement is this. So for this statement it goes to this with 2 argumented constructor, it is x and y. Then from here this is the first statement, again this, because of this statement is goes to the default, right? It goes to default. Now in this first statement is super, and it goes to the object class default class. Here it is object class default constructor, and then you get the object is this, and of course you are having A1 reference variable which points to this. Now when object class default constructor is invoked, it allocates the memory for X, that gets the default value 0, Y gets the default value 0, S gets the default value as null, and it is B gets the default value as false, right? Now when control comes back in this statement, it prints this ABC default constructor. Then here it comes back and it prints ABC int constructor int to int argumented, and this dot x is x. Now this dot x is x, means x value is you're supplying here 10, so this 10 initialized at this point, and here this dot y is y, and it is initialized here. So from here you have to notice that you are calling the 4 argumented constructor, but x and y value is initialized by 2 argumented constructor. It is not this, it is 2 argumented constructor is initializing the value of x and y, and at that time s and b value remains default. Now this statement execution is over, so from here controls come back to this place, and here it is s1 initialized and b is also initialized. So this s1 gets here high, this gets high, and this gets true. Now this execution is over, and 1040 address is returned here, 1020, and execution is over, right? So this is the use of another use of this keyword for constructor chaining. In the next session we are going to see some other use of these keywords. Thanks for watching my video, and please subscribe for more videos.